So thanks everybody for coming along today. The kind of buildings that we have in this country we've been building and designing over the last recent times and how they've compared to the older buildings. And I guess we did a quick article last month, what do you do with 40-degree cooling, sort of 40-degree heat in an ever-warming climate? And the answers, even from the manufacturers, was passive measures first, and then how do we decarbonise the HVAC that we're using.
One of the highlights for me was actually hearing about the refrigerant leakage and how significant that is in releasing carbon emissions into the atmosphere. And I think one of the aspects that we touched on was whether or not we could incorporate the amount topped up and therefore the leakage from the refrigerant gases from air conditioning systems, and whether that could be recorded on the AC inspections on the, I think it's every 5 years.
Worst case is to back themselves with the architects to say, well, if we plug those gaps, what does that do to the air permeability? And how do you, if you're not going to know that definitely until it's done, how do you then size your plant based on a reduced rate?
So yeah, certainly there will be more and more conversation about refrigerants into the future, best use for best cases, and making sure that, again, the correct solution is deployed in the correct application to get the most out of the system that you've deployed on your building.
There's a huge difference when you factor in refrigerant leakage or you don't factor in refrigerant leakage. And it becomes the single most important factor that if you had a catastrophic failure and you lost your refrigerant charge of a system, that will probably outweigh all of the beneficial measures you have from, say, a passive house building, will be worse than a building regs compliant building if that refrigerant is lost. So tackling refrigerant leakage is a huge effort that we need to do, because it's fundamental in reaching our goals. And with the proliferation of heat pumps across the UK, it's only going to magnify as a problem.
The materials that you're using, or the number of times that you replace MEP systems and things like that, and you realize that the embodied carbon per meter squared skyrockets because embodied carbon doesn't consider, it doesn't have time associated with it. We don't have kilograms of CO2 per meter squared per year.
Well, I think the facilities management industry is absolutely key to the ongoing decarbonisation of existing buildings. They're in a very special role because they they operate and maintain the facilities and the engineering systems in those buildings, and they have the opportunity to look at energy saving and carbon reduction measures, and also to win a fair amount of that work in terms of implementing those measures.
I think there's a big difference between commercial developments and current commercial developments and future commercial developments, and then resi. I think in commercial developments there's a lot more agency over how systems work, whereas in residential developments your main challenge is that whatever you put into your building, it gets repeated over and over and over and over again. So unless it's a centralized system. But that comes with its own complexities in terms of ownership and maintenance and things like that.
We should be significantly minimising the mass of our buildings. So there's a big kind of conflict there, and we don't know the answer. We talk about it with you guys, MEP, on projects we work on. There isn't really an answer because no one really knows what the answer is. But I think this whole concept of just packing mass into the building to save, potentially save carbon over the long term is doing untold damage in the kind of immediate term.
And the doubling occupancy was to introduce mechanical cooling and ventilation. We did do some preliminary studies to test if natural ventilation would still be a viable option with those occupant densities, but actually it was deemed that it wouldn't be. So mechanical cooling and ventilation is the way to go.